So, is India's 2026 budget going to be the game changer for its millions of small businesses? The government is promising a totally new approach. In this explainer, we're going to break down their big bet, the 4 huge risks that could completely derail it, and the alternative blueprint experts say is the real key to growth. You know, this one sentence really signals a massive shift. For decades, government support has meant one thing: loans, which just means more debt. The new message to small and medium businesses is completely different. It's basically saying, instead of just helping you survive, we want to help you scale. And we're going to do it not by lending you money, but by investing in you. The big idea here is to turn these small, often struggling businesses into national and maybe even global champions. It's a complete pivot from the old playbook of just protection and subsidies to a brand new one that's all about performance and growth. Think about it like this. For years, government help was like a weight, a loan. It's supposed to help, right? But it often ends up being this heavy burden of debt. The new idea is to provide equity, a stake in the business. And that acts more like a lift, helping promising companies grow without getting crushed by interest payments. Okay, so how exactly is the government planning to pull off this grand vision? Well, their strategy is basically a 3-pronged plan, with each part designed to tackle a major hurdle that small businesses face every single day. So the plan has 3 core parts. First up, you've got equity infusion, basically getting cash into these businesses so they can actually invest in growth. Second, there's liquidity support. This is all about fixing that cash flow crunch so they don't go under while they're waiting to get paid. And third, professional support, helping them navigate the absolute jungle of paperwork and compliance. The number grabbing all the headlines is a whopping 10,000 crore rupee SME growth fund. And let's be super clear, this is not a loan program. This is a war chest. It's designed to buy a stake in high-potential businesses, giving them the rocket fuel they need to expand and become one of those champion companies. And the support doesn't stop there. There's also a top-up to the SRI fund, which is really aimed at getting risk capital to even the smallest micro-enterprises. And they're rolling out a new MSME credit card, which is a really big deal for maybe 1 million first-time business borrowers, helping them manage those day-to-day cash needs without having to go to informal, high-interest lenders. Now, let's talk about the second part of the strategy, which tackles what's been called the Achilles heel of Indian business for a long, long time: getting paid on time. I mean, you can have the best product in the world, but if your customers don't pay you for months on end, your business is toast. So here's what they're doing about it. First, all central government companies must now pay their bills through this online system called TREDS, which pretty much forces them to pay on time. Second, they're guaranteeing invoice discounting. Now, what does that actually mean? It just means if a small business needs cash now, they can sell their unpaid invoice to a bank for a small fee, and because the government's guaranteeing it, that fee is much, much lower. Finally, they're connecting all these systems to make the whole process faster and smoother. It all sounds pretty good on paper, right? But, and there's always a but, experts are pointing to 4 huge risks that could stop this plan from ever really achieving its goals. The vision is bold, for sure, but the hurdles to actually making it happen are pretty significant. So, that massive 10,000 crore rupee fund we just talked about? Well, the first big risk is all about that. It sounds amazing, but the real question is, who's it actually for? Now, what's really interesting here is the sheer scale of the challenge. A staggering 99%, think about that for a second, 99% of all registered MSMEs in India are actually micro enterprises. We're talking tiny businesses with less than 1 crore rupees in investment. Just 1% fall into the small and medium categories. And this really lays out the problem, doesn't it? The goal is to find these champions at the very top of the pyramid. But the fund is designed for companies that already have audited balance sheets and scalable models, the kind of stuff equity investors look for. The big risk here is that all that money goes to that tiny 1% at the top, while the other 99% at the bottom, the ones who provide the most jobs, are completely left behind. All right, let's move on to risk number 2. This one's a biggie. Remember those new payment rules? Well, here's the catch. The TREDS mandate only applies to government companies. What about everyone else? We're talking about a credit gap in the MSME sector of somewhere between 25 to 30 lakh crore rupees. That is an astronomical number. And guess what a huge driver of that gap is? Yep, delayed payments from large private corporations who often use their small suppliers as a kind of free bank for their own working capital. So the potential outcome here is that TREDS just becomes this government-only club, which means
Yeah, if you supply to the government, you'll get paid on time, and that's great. But the wider systemic culture of delayed payments from the private sector, which is where most of the business happens, remains completely untouched. The real problem doesn't get fixed.
Risk number 3 takes us from the private sector to the public sector. Because, a brilliant plan cooked up in Delhi is one thing. Actually making it work on the ground across all of India's different states, that's a whole different ballgame. And here's the rub. All the crucial stuff, industrial land, electricity, local permits, that's all controlled by state governments. So the danger is that all these new benefits just get hoovered up by the states that are already ahead of the game, the ones that are already business friendly. And that could actually make the economic divide between regions even wider. And this brings us to risk number 4, which is a real paradox. The whole point of the budget is to push businesses to become champions by getting more efficient by upgrading their technology. But what happens to jobs when that upgraded tech involves robotics and AI? The MSME sector is India's second biggest employer, and the paradox is that becoming more efficient might actually mean hiring fewer people. So, okay, if the government's plan has some pretty big holes in it, what's the alternative? Well, a bunch of think tanks and industry groups have been putting forward a different idea, a blueprint that focuses less on just pumping in credit and more on fixing the underlying structural problems. Okay, let's break down this alternative blueprint. It gets super specific. To fix private payment delays, they say, don't just ask, mandate that all large private companies use the TREDS payment system. Solves the problem. Second, instead of having dozens of confusing schemes, create one single convergence model, one portal to rule them all. Third, to get banks to lend more, let them use a company's verified GST tax data to figure out the risk, instead of always demanding physical property as collateral. And finally, to really spark innovation, offer a huge 200% tax credit for money spent on R&D. So this all brings us right back to where we started. The ambition to create champions is fantastic. Nobody's arguing with that. But the plan is hitting a wall of really deep structural challenges, from the payment culture to the simple fact that most businesses are tiny micro enterprises that might not be ready for equity in the first place. And that really leaves us with this final question to chew on. For all the talk about equity and liquidity, the plan still frames the problem as just a lack of capital. But is throwing more credit at it really the answer? Or does the real solution lie in fixing the deeper structural issues that stop small businesses from growing in the first place? That is the trillion rupee question.